Have you ever had a spiritual experience that changed your life? Have you ever been locked up against your will in a psych ward? I got both at the same time, and in this video, I'm sharing my personal story of Kundalini awakening and the unexpected journey it took me on. From the pinnacle of bliss to rock bottom, join me as we explore the intersection of spirituality, Western mental health care, and transformation beyond imagination. Aloha, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, your guide to vibrant living, and on this channel, I give you entertainment, inspiration, and education, empowering you to turn your life into an ever more vibrant masterpiece. I felt like a lightning rod for God. And in that moment, a security guard and a police officer walk out those same doors, and they walk up to the truck. Rick getting contracted, and Mary starts to cry, and I had no choice. I could not leave that place. I'm going to tell you the nitty and gritty of it, and at the end, 3 tips for you or someone you know if they ever get into a situation like that, and what it means for all of us collectively. This was 1995. I had no knowledge of or interest in spirituality. My own background as a kid, my parents were recovering Catholics, you could say. I was an agnostic, like hedging my bets. As some things started to happen in the spiritual world, shall we say, which I'll tell you about, I didn't understand them. I had no context for them. In many ways, this episode, we can call it that, came out of the blue, yet in retrospect there were some precursors. One of them was I was doing an immense amount of physical training. I had stopped drinking, stopped using any substances. I was training very hard for a big judo competition. I went to it and against all odds did really well. I had lost quite a bit of physical weight. Plus, I was in a intense writing phase at that point. I sent out my first poems for publication, fully expecting that they would all get rejected, and 4 or 5 of them were accepted into journals, which was a real shock. And plus, some big changes in relationships, intimate relationships. I'm not going to go into all the details on this. I've actually written an entire book about this. I'm giving you the short version here. One way of describing what happened: I lost interest in and connection to the physical world, the earthly world, our normal experience of the world. I wasn't sleeping much. I wasn't eating much. I was eating a lot of blue-green algae. I was experiencing what now I know is spiritual phenomena, psychic phenomena. I didn't know then. I just knew that I was an awareness of other people's emotions. I had an awareness of other people's thoughts. I was experiencing what you could call bliss, a sense of oneness. I didn't have any context for it. I'd never really even heard of anything like that. I was not acting like myself. I was behaving differently. One of my good friends whom I lived with, Rick, came to me in the midst of that, and he said, "Hey Daniel, I'm a little concerned about you." I was like, "Oh, that's nice, thank you. I appreciate that, and no need for concern." He's like, "Well, I called up your therapist." And I had started into therapy just a few months before that because I had realized that, and I was in my mid-20s at this point, I didn't know what emotions were, let alone what my own emotions were. I knew I felt things, I just didn't know what I felt or what they were called. So I had gotten into therapy, first time in my adult life, and was really enjoying it. It was powerful. That Rick had gotten in touch with my therapist, that was a little weird, but okay, whatever. I wasn't bothered by much in that period. He said, she said that you should come in for a psychiatric evaluation. I thought to myself, no thanks, I'm not really interested in that. And he said, "Well, look, I'd feel better if you did." So I felt him and I cared about him. I was like, "Well, okay, fine. If you'd feel better, I'll do that." Well, sure, why not? Like, all right, well, let's go. I'm like, "No, okay, let's go." So my friend Mary was visiting also, and 3 of us piled into this little 2-seater red pickup truck. Rick drove. Again, not being concerned about normal physical world stuff or normal protocols. It didn't occur to me that the fact that it was a hot summer day and I had no shoes on would be a problem. I was really appreciating not having shoes on for several days in a row. The fact that I just had sweat shorts on and I didn't think to bring a wallet or an ID didn't seem to matter at all. We get to the hospital. We have to wait for a while, and I guess they were busy, and I was getting a bit antsy and frustrated and tired of waiting. And I'm also through this period experiencing more of this sort of psychic spiritual phenomena. At times really blissful, but and at other times bit confusing because I'm like, what's going on? Like I'm experiencing the movement of energy inside me. Finally, we get in for the evaluation. And because the way they structured it there in that state, psychiatric evaluation is in the emergency room. The emergency room, as you probably know, in the US is a big room, and they have sort of like little rooms sectioned off by curtains. So we're in this little room. Young woman, maybe a psychologist, I'm not sure. She has a understudy, what do you call that, assistant with her. She has a clipboard and she's asking me questions. And they're probably the standard questions that a psychiatric evaluation would ask. And they're questions about my mother and my father. And yes, my father was an alcoholic. And yes, my mother had heart problems. And we're going through this whole thing, and I'm just starting to get really annoyed by it, frustrated, tired of it. My whole being and my mind is racing at this point. And yes, absolutely, you could call that a manic episode, and you wouldn't be wrong. Hold that thought, though. We will come back to it. I'm getting impatient, even irritated. Maybe not hiding that irritation as well as could have been kind. The woman taking the notes finally said, hey, why don't we take a little break? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's take a break. So she and her assistant, they leave the room. Intern, that's the word I was looking for. They leave the room, they go out through the curtain and leave me alone in there and tell me they're going to come back in a few minutes. After a moment alone, I think to myself, why am I here? Rick wanted me to come. Do I want to be here? No. I look out through the curtain at the big room, and there are a few people around doing their thing, but nobody's really paying attention. I think, well, if I don't want to be here, there's no reason for me to be here. I walk out across the room, and I see over at the other side of this room, there is a exit door, and it's one of those old-fashioned exit doors that you see in institutional structures sometimes, where it has the heavy door lock that, if you push it, it'll go clank, clank. And there's a sign that says, fire alarm will sound. So I had this great moment of truth as I get over toward that door. I'm like, this is gonna cause a ruckus, but I don't care. I just gotta get out of here. So, pakunk. I press it, and then I'm out into the full sunlight of the day. No alarm. Woohoo! Feeling great about that. And at this point, I have no idea what I'm going to do. All I know is what I was experiencing in there was not to my liking, didn't feel good or natural or helpful. Being outside, free, felt really good. So I just started walking. And again, mind you, I'm sweat shorts, no shirt, no shoes. I did have a shirt, although as I proceeded further and further along this walking, and it started to get really hot, I took the shirt off. That felt great. I got to this field, and it had been a few days since I had been training, so I just started running across the field, felt this incredible energy running through me, and as I'm running across the field, I look up, and I see in front of me is not really a mountain, this is Western Massachusetts, but a big hill. And at the top of it, I see there's this ancient looking stone tower. And as I look up at it, it clicks. I realize that is the place called Poet's Seat. I have several friends who've been telling me for literally years to this point that I need to go check out Poet's Seat. And so I realize as I'm running up here, I climb all the way up there, get up there. By this point, I'm really hot. I'm starting to sweat. The day is changing though, and the cloud cover is coming on really strong. It's getting ready to be a storm. I get up there, there's nobody around, and it is really an old stone tower, and I walk up this circular stairway inside, and I get to the very top of it. There's a beautiful view over the whole Pioneer Valley. What it felt like though, and it seems cliche to me, yet still, even to this day, many, many years later, very true. I felt like a lightning rod for God, as if there was some divine power that just poured itself down into me. I felt electrified, alive, this heat running through me, this energy running through me. And as I stood there, the realization came to me, I never have to worry. I never need to fear, because this physical mechanism, this body, it's self-healing. And no matter whatever happens in the world in my life, if I get hurt, I will heal. And this peace came over me. Years later, I heard the term that Jesus said, the peace that passeth all understanding. And I felt this level of peace that I had never known before in my life. I took it and I laid down. and I laid down on this stone rooftop, I guess you could call it. And then I became aware of just how hot my body was, because the rain was starting to fall. The stone underneath me was cold, and yet my body was so hot. There was steam coming off. And I laid there for a couple moments in this something like rapture. And I didn't know this expression then either. I heard it years later. Before enlightenment, chop wood. After enlightenment, chop wood. And I didn't know the word enlightenment either at that point, and I didn't have anything in me to say, oh, I'm enlightened now. I just had some kind of profound moment or realization, a literal mountaintop moment. Then I got that feeling like, well, what's next? I don't know. Let's see. And so I got up and I walked down the stairs, and I'm 35 miles from my home with, at this point, no shirt, pair of sweatpants, no ID, no shoes, no idea even which way is home. So I think, well, one foot after the other, and I just start walking. No kidding, within about 2 minutes, I'm walking down this dirt pathway there. Then red 2-seater truck comes up, Rick is driving, and somehow, I don't know how he figured it out where I was, and he came up and he parked the truck beside me, and I leaned in the window and I was like, look, man, no offense, but I don't want to go back there. He's like, I get it. I'm sorry. It was a bad idea. I think I want to go home. He's like, all right, well, get in. And I said, okay. So then he says, but we need to go back to the hospital just to pick up Mary. Okay, I said. So we're driving back down the hill to the hospital, and he pulls into the emergency room circle, and I'm like, I don't want to go in there. So I was like, all right, can you go get her? Yeah, sure, I'll go get her. So he walks in, and a moment later, the two of them come walking out through those, really fast emergency room glass doors, and I could see they're kind of arguing, a little bit of a heated discussion, and then they get over to the truck, and Mary's on the passenger side and Rick's on the driver's side, and I'm sitting in the middle of this 2-seater truck. And then as they're talking, right in that moment, I'm thinking to myself, why don't we talk about this on the way home? And in that moment, a security guard and a police officer walk out those same doors, and they walk up to the truck, and I can see Rick getting contracted, and Mary starts to cry, and they lean down into the truck and they say, are you? And I say, yes. And they say, well, you have to come with us. And I say, nope, I don't actually, thank you very much. And they say, well, we have a section 9 or 12 or whatever it was, and that means you have to come with us and we'll use force if necessary. And making that part of the story a little short, they reached in, pulled me out, handcuffed me behind my back, walked me inside, then literally put me into a straitjacket, quite literally put me in a straitjacket, marched me down the hall, and locked me in, quite literally, a padded room, and left me there. Imagine this scenario. If I wasn't crazy before that, if I wasn't having a quote-unquote psychotic episode prior to that, that would bring one on. Can you imagine that? Somebody in the middle of a stressful situation gets locked and put alone into a room. Wow. Anyway, my point here is not to indict the Western medical system or what happened. It's to share with you this true story. In short order, they took me from there up to the locked psych ward, and it felt to me immediately just like the stereotypical images I had. Maybe you have some of them too. If you saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or those old sort of institutional structures, and people looking with kind of crazed eyes, and some people smoking, and it was like that. It was a very powerful moment when I walked in and locked eyes with this one woman who looked very much like my sister, who had some years before killed herself, and didn't look like as in they had similar aspect, as in there was just something energetically similar. It was unnerving. Continued to walk me past through into an office where I met with a psychiatrist for 15 minutes, and he gave me a diagnosis, the diagnosis being bipolar disorder. He concluded that my father also had bipolar disorder, and he medicated himself through alcohol. I was incredibly lucky, however, because even though I was to be locked in that place and I had no say about this, oh, by the way, you might be wondering, as I was in that moment, like, how did this happen? What on earth happened that caused this? Little did I know that The law, at least at that point in Massachusetts, is if anybody leaves during a psychiatric evaluation, that is automatic cause for admission to a locked ward without an involuntary admission. I had no choice. I could not leave that place. The blessing that came to me that night, and there were many blessings that came to me, and I am incredibly grateful for this entire experience. The blessing that came to me that night, though, was that they did not force me to take any medication. I'm very lucky for that. However, in that 15-minute interview, the psychiatrist did tell me, bipolar disorder, it will get worse. It'll continue for the rest of my life, that when I am in a manic phase, which I was in that moment, he told me, very bad time to make any kind of decisions, irrationality sets in, and I for sure needed to be on drugs for the rest of my life, pharmaceuticals. There were 3 different ones. I could choose between them. I needed to start immediately. Over the course of the next 5 days, I had some incredibly powerful experiences there. I won't tell you about those now. One of them, though, was with that woman I saw on the intake who, as it turned out, had very similar symptoms to my sister Casey, who had some years before killed herself. Guilt and shame that I still carried about my sister's death, if you know anything about those who have been around suicides, is very common. Because I was able to connect with this woman, Jen was her name, in that ward, and provide in some way some healing for her. And even though she was considered, she had been there for years, considered by them a lost cause, she actually started to heal, be able to sit still for the first time in many years, from what they told me. Her and I had gotten close in some way, and when I was leaving, the day I was leaving, I was actually feeling nervous about leaving, about abandoning her is the way it felt, because she'd come to, I don't know, rely on me in some way. That morning, we were in a occupational therapy group. We were playing some kind of card game. The therapist gave her a card, and it said on the card, if you could give the person next to you anything in the world, what would you give them? I was next to her, and she said, I would give him a hug because I've never had the will to live before, and he gave that to me. I quickly invited her, encouraged her to change the phrasing to, I helped her to find the will to live, and so she did make that change, and I left there that day. And part of how I left, by the way, again, I said I was lucky, didn't force me to take drugs. I was lucky because I was smart, and I was lucky because I had friends that came to support me. So many of the people that were in that locked ward didn't have those things. The specific strategy I used, right? Remember this psychiatrist who literally had say-so of whether I could leave or not, ever. And most people on an involuntary admission are there for at least 30 days. I ended up being there for 5 days, which, believe me, felt like an eternity. One of my greatest strategies was I came back to him after a day and I said, Doctor, I totally see that you are right, and I need to be on medication, and I accept what you've told me, and I realize that in this manic phase of my life, I shouldn't make that decision. I should wait a few weeks until things settle down a bit, and then I should decide which medication. And I could see on his face, he did not like that, but he could not really argue with it. I also agreed to do what he said, which was go to outpatient therapy. Same hospital, they had an outpatient group therapy thing. And I'm gonna wind this down for you here in a moment. When I went for the check-in at the group therapy, the guy who checked me in, really nice guy, good therapist, he said to me, our job here is to make you normally unhappy like the rest of us. Our job here is to make you normally unhappy like the rest of us. It wasn't until a few weeks later that kind of the dust of my life had settled that I was starting to, regain my confidence, because it was a very scary, traumatic experience, losing my liberty, wondering like what went wrong. A friend of mine said to me, Daniel, I'd be very careful of these people. And again, well-meaning. I have no complaint about any of those experiences. What it means for us as a culture, though, is, well, generally speaking, we're not very well equipped to handle spiritual awakening, because spiritual awakening looks a lot like going crazy. I only heard the phrase Kundalini actually from a nurse on that ward, suggesting to me, hey, you might want to look at other alternatives here. What I got from that experience, one, was a really profound healing with Jen as related to my sister. Two, had my first real dark night of the soul. Again, not a phrase I knew at the time, yet later on I realized that is a typical initiation in spiritual evolution. And I've been blessed to have many of them since I've gone on my life. And lastly, when I came out of that experience in time, I got depressed. I had tasted oneness. I had tasted, quote, enlightenment, yet something had gone wrong. And when I came out of it, I didn't know how to live that. So I got depressed. When I came out of that depression, though, that's when my life really changed, and it got me obsessed with personal and spiritual development. Jesus said, we're here to be in the world, but not of it. And it's just like every great athlete knows, our job as an athlete is to play the game, love the game, play as fully as possible, and still remember it's a game. And it's the same thing in life. For you or anybody you know who might go through an experience like this, my top tips are, one, get support, right? And I was really lucky that I had friends that connected me later with the Spiritual Emergence Network from Stan Groff, and my first shamanic counselor, and I had traditional Western therapy also. Getting support is huge. Two, know that this is a good thing. And I've been blessed in my life to have many more Kundalini awakenings, and they all contain with it some fear, because on some level it's the animal part of us breaking down, transforming into a more spiritual part of us. And the hard wiring for us towards survival is that's scary. And lastly, know that it's an awakening that is leading you to serve more, to be happier, right? Every dark night of the soul is followed by an even brighter morning, an even brighter sunrise than we could have ever imagined. All right, y'all, enough said on this story. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you liked this, then you might like that.